7 biblical signs. God is aligning your heart with His will. There are moments when nothing around you seems to change, yet something deep inside you begins to shift. You still wake up to the same routines, face the same responsibilities, and walk through the same circumstances, but your reactions are different. What once stirred anxiety now feels quieter. What once felt urgent now feels less demanding. And you may not have words for it, but you sense that God is working beneath the surface. This is often how alignment begins, not with dramatic signs or sudden direction, but with subtle changes in the heart. God rarely starts by changing your path. He starts by shaping your desires. Before He leads you somewhere new, He aligns who you are becoming with, where He intends to lead you. Many people pray for God to reveal His will while unknowingly resisting the work He wants to do within them. But Scripture shows that God's will is not discovered through effort alone. It is discerned through surrender. Alignment happens when the heart becomes willing to be shaped, not when life becomes easier to manage. This process can feel disorienting at first. You may notice that certain desires no longer satisfy you, yet new ones have not fully formed. You may feel less driven by impulse and more drawn toward peace, clarity, and obedience. This in-between space is not confusion. It is recalibration. God is gently bringing your heart into harmony with His will. Alignment is not about losing your identity. It is about discovering it more clearly. God does not erase who you are. He refines it. He removes what pulls you away from Him and strengthens what draws you closer. This work is quiet, intentional, and deeply personal. If you feel that your heart is being softened, redirected, or unsettled in ways you cannot fully explain, do not rush to escape it. Scripture shows that God often aligns the heart before He reveals the next step. What feels like uncertainty may actually be preparation. As we walk through these biblical signs together, listen carefully, not to measure yourself, but to discern what God may be doing within you. Alignment is not something you force, it is something you allow. And when God aligns a heart with His will, the path forward becomes clearer in His time. When God is aligning your heart with His will, one of the first signs is that your desires begin to shift without force. There is no dramatic command, no sudden pressure, no internal panic pushing you to change. Instead, what once felt important slowly loses its grip. Things you used to pursue with urgency no longer stir the same hunger, not because they were sinful, but because they are no longer central. This change can be unsettling because desire has always guided movement. When desire shifts, direction feels uncertain. You may wonder why certain goals no longer motivate you, why certain ambitions feel strangely hollow, or why the excitement you once relied on has faded. But Scripture shows that God often aligns the heart by changing what it wants before changing what it does. God does not force alignment, He reshapes affection. He allows old desires to loosen naturally so that new ones can form without resistance. When God's will begins to take root, the heart starts wanting different things without being threatened. Obedience stops feeling like loss and starts feeling like relief. This shift often happens quietly. No one around you may notice it. You may not even be able to explain it clearly. You simply realize that what once drove you no longer satisfies you. And instead of panic, there is a subtle peace. That peace is not emptiness. It is space. Space for God to realign what matters. Scripture reflects this pattern consistently. God aligned the hearts of those He called by reshaping their desires long before their circumstances changed. They did not move because they were pressured. They moved because they no longer wanted to stay where they were. Alignment begins when staying becomes heavier than trusting. As desires shift, your reactions change. You stop chasing what once consumed you. You begin turning away from things that once held power without feeling deprived. This is not discipline driven by fear. It is transformation driven by clarity. God is teaching your heart to agree with Him instead of arguing against Him. You may notice that your inner resistance weakens. Things you once struggled to surrender now feel easier to release, not because you are stronger, but because your heart is being aligned. God's will no longer feels like opposition. It feels like direction. This process also exposes false urgency. When the heart is misaligned, everything feels rushed. Decisions feel pressured, choices feel heavy. As alignment increases, urgency fades. You no longer feel compelled to force outcomes. You begin to trust timing. God is aligning not just what you want, but how you wait. You may still desire good things. Alignment does not remove longing, it refines it. Your desires become calmer, deeper, less reactive. You want what lasts instead of what excites temporarily. This is one of the clearest signs that God is working within you. Do not rush to replace old desires just because they are fading. Let them go gently. Allow the space to remain. God fills aligned hearts slowly and intentionally. New desires will come shaped by wisdom rather than impulse. If you sense this quiet shift happening inside you, do not resist it. Do not force yourself back into old patterns just to feel motivated again. God is not taking something away without purpose. He is aligning your heart so that when you move freely, not reluctantly. When desires change without force, alignment is underway. God is teaching your heart to want what He wills. And when desire and obedience meet, walking with God no longer feels like strain. It begins to feel like agreement. As God continues aligning your heart with His will, conviction becomes clearer than confusion. You may not have every answer, you may not see the full picture, but deep inside, there is a growing sense of what is right and what is not. Decisions that once felt tangled now feel simpler, even when they are not easy. The noise quiets and discernment sharpens. This clarity does not come from logic alone, it comes from sensitivity. God is training your heart to recognize alignment before you can explain it. You begin to feel unrest when something pulls you away from Him, and peace when something draws you closer, even if that path involves sacrifice. This peace is not comfort, it is confirmation. Earlier in the journey, confusion may have dominated your decisions. You weighed opinions, outcomes, and fears. You asked many voices for guidance. But as alignment deepens, conviction grows stronger than external influence. You no longer need constant validation to know when something is off. Your heart responds before your mind finishes reasoning. Scripture shows that God guides His people through inner conviction as they mature. He writes His law on the heart, not just in words. This means obedience becomes intuitive rather than forced. You sense when a door is not meant to be opened. You recognize when a path looks good but feels wrong. This discernment is a gift formed through alignment. This stage can feel uncomfortable because conviction does not always come with explanation. You may know you should not proceed, but struggle to articulate why. Others may question your decision. You may question yourself. But alignment teaches you to trust God's guidance even when clarity is internal rather than external. As conviction strengthens, confusion loses its grip. You spend less time debating and more time responding. You stop overanalyzing and start listening. God is not removing thought. He is prioritizing discernment. Responsibility requires this kind of clarity because not every decision will come with obvious answers. You may notice that certain compromises now feel heavier. Things you once tolerated now disturb your peace. This is not legalism, it is sensitivity. God is aligning your heart so that small misalignments are recognized before they grow into larger ones. Conviction also brings confidence, not arrogance, but assurance. You move forward without constantly looking back. You choose obedience without resentment. You accept God's direction without needing to defend it. This confidence does not come from certainty about outcomes. It comes from trust in God's presence. If confusion is decreasing and conviction is increasing in your life, pay attention. This is a strong sign of alignment. God is tuning your heart to recognize His will without constant struggle. He is teaching you to walk by discernment, not by pressure. Alignment does not remove questions, but it removes paralysis. You may still wonder how things will unfold, but you no longer feel stuck. Conviction gives direction even when details remain hidden. When conviction becomes clearer than confusion, God is aligning your heart with His will. He is teaching you to recognize His guidance from within, so that obedience flows naturally and faith remains steady. As God continues aligning your heart with His will, resistance begins to weaken. What once felt like an internal struggle starts to soften. You may still feel hesitation, but the sharp tension fades. There is less arguing with God, less negotiating, less delaying. Even when His will challenges your comfort, your heart no longer pushes back the way it once did. Earlier in the journey, resistance often showed up as fear, control, or the need to fully understand before obeying. You wanted clarity before commitment. You wanted assurance before surrender, but alignment changes this posture. You begin trusting God's character more than your own understanding. Obedience no longer feels like loss, it feels like agreement. This does not mean obedience becomes easy, it means it becomes honest. You may still feel the cost, but you stop fighting the direction. You stop looking for alternatives that allow you to keep control. God is not forcing your will into submission. He is reshaping it so that it bends without breaking. Scripture shows that when hearts align, obedience flows more naturally. Jesus Himself prayed with honesty in the face of suffering, yet surrendered without resistance. Not because the path was painless, but because His heart was aligned. Alignment does not remove difficulty, it removes rebellion. You may notice that excuses lose their strength, delays feel heavier. When God nudges you, you respond more quickly, not out of fear, but out of trust. This responsiveness is a sign of maturity. God is teaching your heart to say yes before fully understanding how things will unfold. As resistance weakens, peace increases, even in hard decisions. You stop bracing yourself against God's will and start resting within it. The inner battle quiets. Obedience stops draining you emotionally because you are no longer pulling in the opposite direction. This stage also brings humility. You recognize that fighting God never produced peace. You learn that surrender is not weakness, it is wisdom. God aligns the heart by showing it that His will is safer than self-protection. If you feel less defensive, less resistant, and more willing to trust God even when the path is unclear, do not overlook it. This is not passivity. It is alignment. God is teaching your heart to cooperate with His will rather than compete against it. When resistance weakens, obedience becomes relational instead of transactional. You are no longer asking what you will gain or lose. You are responding because you trust the one who is leading you. This is a powerful sign that God is aligning your heart with His will. When the struggle lessens and surrender becomes natural, alignment is no longer something you are seeking. It is something you are living. As God aligns your heart with His will, prayer begins to change in a profound way. You find yourself praying less for God to change situations and more for God to change you. Earlier, prayer may have focused on outcomes, timing, and relief. You asked God to open doors, fix problems, or remove discomfort. Those prayers were sincere and God heard them, but alignment reshapes the center of prayer. Now prayer becomes a place of surrender rather than negotiation. You are no longer trying to convince God to act according to your plan. You are asking Him to shape your heart according to His. Instead of saying, "Oh Lord, do this," you begin saying, "Lord, show me how to walk through this with you." This shift signals deep trust. Scripture shows that alignment always moves prayer inward before it moves life outward. When God's will becomes more important than personal comfort, prayer matures. You start caring less about controlling outcomes and more about remaining faithful. Prayer becomes less demanding and more receptive. You listen as much as you speak. This change can feel vulnerable. Asking God to change you requires honesty. It opens the door for correction, refinement, and growth. But it also brings freedom. You stop carrying the burden of managing everything yourself. You release control and allow God to work at the deepest level. As prayer shifts, anxiety loosens its grip. You are no longer trying to force peace through answers. You are receiving peace through alignment. Even when circumstances remain unchanged, your inner posture is different. You are steadier, more grounded, less reactive. You may notice that your prayers become simpler but more sincere. Fewer words, more meaning, less urgency, more trust. This is not a loss of passion, it is clarity. God is teaching you that alignment matters more than explanation. When prayer becomes about transformation rather than control, obedience becomes more natural. You stop asking God to bless every decision and start asking Him to guide your heart before decisions are made. This prepares you to walk in His will without constant confusion. If your prayers are changing in this way, recognize it as a sign of alignment. God is not ignoring your needs. He is addressing them at the root. He is shaping your heart so that His will no longer feels distant or difficult. When prayer shifts from asking God to change things to asking God to change you, alignment is taking place. Your heart is learning to trust God's wisdom more than its own desires, and that trust is the foundation of a life aligned with His will. As God continues aligning your heart with His will, obedience begins to feel more natural than forced. What once required internal effort now flows with less resistance. You no longer obey simply because you are afraid of consequences or driven by obligation. You obey because your heart is beginning to agree with God's direction. Earlier, obedience may have felt heavy. You knew what was right, but doing it required constant internal pressure. You wrestled with hesitation, fear, or the desire to choose something easier. But alignment reshapes motivation. The heart starts moving in the same direction as God's will, reducing friction along the way. Scripture shows that true obedience grows out of agreement, not coercion. When the heart is aligned, obedience is no longer a struggle between desire and duty. It becomes a response to trust. You may still feel the cost, but you no longer resent it. Obedience feels purposeful rather than restrictive. You may notice that decisions come with less turmoil. You recognize the right step more quickly. You act without prolonged inner debate. This does not mean you stop thinking carefully. It means your heart is no longer pulling in the opposite direction. God is aligning your desires so that obedience makes sense internally, not just externally. This stage brings relief. You stop fighting yourself, you stop negotiating with God, you move forward with a quiet confidence even when the path requires sacrifice. That confidence is not arrogance. It is peace born from alignment. Obedience also becomes consistent. You are no longer faithful only when it feels rewarding. You remain faithful because it reflects who you are becoming. God values this deeply. Responsibility cannot be sustained by forced obedience. It requires willing obedience rooted in trust. As obedience becomes more natural, fear loses influence. You are less afraid of missing out, less anxious about outcomes, less concerned with approval. You trust that God's will is not working against you, but for you. This trust frees the heart to respond without hesitation. If you notice that obedience feels lighter, clearer, and less conflicted than before, recognize it as a sign of alignment. God is not lowering His standard. He is strengthening your heart. He is teaching you to walk with Him rather than resist Him. When obedience flows from alignment, faith becomes steady and sustainable. You are no longer driven by pressure, but guided by conviction. And conviction rooted in alignment will carry you faithfully wherever God leads. As God aligns your heart with His will, His timing begins to matter more to you than your urgency. What once felt unbearable to wait for now feels entrusted to God. You still desire movement, you still hope for change, but the pressure to rush fades. Patience replaces anxiety, not because you stopped caring, but because you started trusting. Earlier, urgency may have driven your decisions. You felt the need to act quickly, secure outcomes, or resolve uncertainty as soon as possible. Waiting felt like loss. Delay felt like denial. But alignment reshapes how you view time. You begin to believe that God's timing protects you, not restricts you. Scripture consistently shows that God's will unfolds in seasons, not shortcuts. Those whose hearts were aligned learned to wait without resentment. They trusted that God was not slow, but intentional. Alignment teaches the heart to rest in God's pace rather than demand its own. This change can feel unfamiliar. You may notice that situations which once stirred impatience now stir prayer instead. You wait without constant frustration. You pause without panic. This is not passivity. It is confidence that God sees the full picture when you do not. As urgency weakens, discernment strengthens. You are less likely to force doors open prematurely. You become more attentive to timing than opportunity. God is aligning your heart to recognize that a good thing at the wrong time can still lead you away from His will. Waiting also becomes more peaceful. You stop measuring progress by speed. You begin measuring it by faithfulness. God values this shift deeply because responsibility cannot be sustained by haste. It requires patience, restraint, and trust. If you notice that waiting no longer feels like punishment but preparation, pay attention. This is a sign of alignment. God is teaching your heart to move when He moves, not when pressure demands action. Alignment does not remove desire, it removes desperation. You still long for what God has promised, but you trust Him enough not to rush ahead of Him. This trust anchors obedience and protects peace. When God's timing matters more than your urgency, alignment is at work. Your heart is learning to rest in God's wisdom, confident that His will unfolds exactly when it should. As God completes the work of aligning your heart with His will, peace remains even when outcomes are uncertain. This peace is not the result of everything being resolved. Questions may still exist, circumstances may still be unclear, the future may still feel open, yet your heart is no longer restless. Anxiety no longer rules your inner world. There is a quiet confidence that you are where you need to be with God. Earlier, peace may have depended on clarity. When you knew what was coming, you felt calm. When plans were secure, you felt stable. But alignment reshapes the source of peace. You no longer need certainty about outcomes to remain grounded. You trust God enough to remain steady without knowing how everything will unfold. Scripture shows that this kind of peace is a strong indicator of alignment. It is the peace that guarded the hearts of those who obeyed God without seeing immediate results. They moved forward without guarantees, anchored in the knowledge that God was with them. Peace did not come from control. It came from trust. This peace changes how you respond to uncertainty. You no longer panic when things feel unresolved. You no longer rush to fix what God has not asked you to fix. You wait without resentment. You act without fear. God is teaching your heart that His will is a safe place, even when the path ahead is unclear. You may notice that worry no longer drives your decisions. You consider choices carefully, but without desperation. You are willing to wait, willing to listen, willing to let God unfold things in His time. This steadiness reflects alignment. God has shifted your heart from anxiety to assurance. Peace in uncertainty does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop controlling. You still pray. You still hope. You still desire God's promises. But those desires no longer disturb your peace. They are held with trust rather than tension. This kind of peace also protects obedience. When outcomes are uncertain, fear often tempts people to compromise. But alignment keeps the heart steady. You remain faithful even when results are delayed. You do not abandon God's will just because the road feels long. If you find that peace remains in your heart even when answers are incomplete, recognize it as a sign of deep alignment. God has anchored your trust in Him rather than in outcomes. He has taught your heart that His presence is enough to sustain you. This peace is not temporary. It is the fruit of alignment. It grows as you continue trusting God with what you cannot yet see. And it remains even when circumstances change, because it is rooted in who God is, not in what He does next. When peace remains in uncertainty, alignment has reached a deep place in the heart. God has brought your will into harmony with His. And from that place, whatever comes next can be faced with confidence, humility, and trust. God does not align a heart for a moment. He aligns it for a way of living. What you have been experiencing is not temporary adjustment or emotional movement. It is deep formation. God has been quietly reshaping how you desire, how you decide, how you wait, how you pray, and how you trust. Alignment is not about arriving at a perfect place. It is about remaining in agreement with God, even when the path ahead is still unfolding. If your heart feels calmer, less rushed, and more anchored than before, do not underestimate that change. This is what alignment looks like. You no longer need constant clarity to remain faithful. You no longer require perfect conditions to obey. You are learning to rest in God's will rather than resist it. That rest is not passivity, it is confidence built on trust. Alignment does not remove difficulty, it removes inner conflict. You may still face decisions, delays, and uncertainty, but the struggle within has softened. Your heart is no longer pulling against God's direction, it is learning to move with Him. That harmony protects you from anxiety, impulsiveness, and regret. God aligns hearts because aligned hearts can walk faithfully without losing peace. This process is ongoing. God continues aligning the heart as long as you remain surrendered. Some days will feel clearer than others. Some seasons will require renewed trust. But alignment gives you a steady place to return to. When confusion rises, you listen. When urgency presses, you wait. When fear whispers, you remain grounded. This is the fruit of a heart aligned with God's will. As you come to the end of this message, do not rush past what God may be showing you. Take a moment to reflect on how your desires have changed, how your resistance has softened, how your prayer has deepened, and how peace has begun to settle even when answers are incomplete. These are not small things, they are signs that God has been at work in you. If this message resonated with your season, take a simple step of response. Leaving a like on this video helps this message reach others who may be experiencing the same quiet work of alignment. And if you feel led, write a short phrase in the comments such as, "Align my heart with your will," or "I choose to trust God's timing." Speaking that intention matters more than you realize. If messages like this help you stay grounded and discerning in your walk with God, consider subscribing to this channel. It allows these moments of reflection, truth, and spiritual clarity to remain part of your routine. You are not committing to content. You are making space for alignment to continue. God is not finished shaping your heart. Alignment is not the end of the journey. It is the foundation for everything that comes next. Remain open, remain faithful, remain surrendered. When a heart is aligned with God's will, it becomes a safe place for His purpose to unfold.